The bright summer sun was flooding Detective DeMarco's office at the Columbus police station. The rays filtered through the blinds, creating streaks of light on the desk littered with papers. The clock on the wall showed 8 in the morning. DeMarco took a sip of strong coffee and reached for the new case folder that had arrived a few minutes ago. "Malik, missing in action 3 days ago," read the caption on the cover. DeMarco opened the folder and began looking through the meager materials. A missing persons report filed by a young woman named Tamara, a few photos, and a preliminary report from the first responding patrol officers. Tamara, the missing man's wife, reported that her husband had not returned home after a business meeting. According to the report, the marriage had been consummated only 6 days earlier, and the missing persons report was filed 3 days after the wedding. This circumstance immediately caught the detective's attention. It was too unusual. DeMarco took a sip of coffee from his mug and continued to study the documents. Malik, 37, successful owner of a chain of Caribbean restaurants. 4 establishments in Columbus, 1 in Cincinnati. Clean reputation, no trouble with the law, stable business. Tamara, 25, worked as a hostess at one of his restaurants. According to colleagues, the romance developed rapidly, met about 3 months before the wedding. The phone on the desk rang, interrupting the detective's musings. "DeMarco," he answered. "She's here," the duty officer reported. "The missing man's wife is waiting in the interview room." DeMarco got up, picked up the folder, and headed toward the interrogation room. Through the glass door, he saw a young woman. She sat with a straight back, tapping her fingers nervously on the table. Impeccable makeup, expensive clothes, fine jewelry. Everything spoke of good taste and a lot of money. "Good morning, Mrs. Tamara," DeMarco said, entering the room. "I'm Detective DeMarco. I'll be handling the case of your husband's disappearance." Tamara looked up at him, her eyes full of concern. "Did you find Malik? Is there any news?" "Not yet," DeMarco answered, sitting down across from her. "But we're doing everything we can. I'd like to ask you a few questions to get a better understanding of the situation." Tamara nodded, nervously rubbing her wedding ring. "Tell me about the day of the disappearance. What happened?" "It was Thursday," Tamara began. "Malik said he had a business meeting with his suppliers. He left around 10 a.m. He said he'd be back for dinner. I cooked his favorite dish, jambalaya, and waited until 9 p.m. Then I started calling, but the phone was out of range." "Do you know who exactly he was seeing?" "No." Tamara shook her head. "He didn't go into details. He just said it was important for business." "And how did you meet Malik?" DeMarco changed the subject. Tamara's eyes warmed for a moment. "I was working as a hostess in his restaurant on the high street. We crossed paths often, but for a long time we just said hello. Then he invited me to dinner. He said he'd been watching me for a long time and admired my work." She smiled at the memory. "He was so attentive, caring. He immediately surrounded me with care." "And how quickly did your relationship develop?" "We dated for 3 months. Then he proposed. In his restaurant, in front of everyone. It was so romantic." She was silent, as if remembering that moment. "A month later we got married. It was a small ceremony, just close friends and family." DeMarco took notes, watching Tamara carefully. Something in her story seemed rehearsed, like a well-prepared speech. "Was anyone against your marriage? Maybe someone in Malik's family or your mutual acquaintances?" Tamara tensed, but quickly pulled herself together. "His sister, Layla. She never made it a secret that she didn't like me. She thought I was with Malik for the money." She grinned bitterly, as if she couldn't believe that someone could love her brother for nothing. "Where did you live before you met Malik? What did you do?" "I came to Columbus 2 years ago from Atlanta. I worked various jobs, waitress, receptionist at a beauty parlor. I had a few odd jobs until I got a job with Malik." "Do you have any family here? Friends?" "No," Tamara shook her head. "I grew up in the foster care system. I never had a family. And friends..." She hesitated. "Mostly acquaintances from work. No one close." DeMarco made a few more notes. The story sounded plausible, but something was bugging him. "Did Malik have enemies? Someone who might wish him harm?" "No, not at all!" Tamara exclaimed. "Everyone loved him. He never refused to help anyone, was always honest in business. I don't know anyone who could harm him." "And problems in business?" Financial difficulties? Not that I know of. The restaurants were making a steady income. Malik never complained about money. DeMarco stood up, signaling that the first round of questions was over. Thank you for the information, Mrs. Tamara. We'll keep you posted on the investigation. In the meantime, please don't leave town and stay in touch. After Tamara left, the detective returned to his office and began reviewing his notes. Too much uncertainty, too few concrete details. He decided to start by checking Tamara's word about her past and sent a request to his colleagues in Atlanta. A few hours later, DeMarco parked outside a house in an upscale Columbus neighborhood. It was where Layla, the sister of the missing Malik, lived. The two-story mansion with its manicured garden spoke of her wealth. Lush beds of colorful flowers framed the driveway, and sprinklers swirled on the mowed lawn, creating iridescent shimmers in the sunlight. The door was opened by a tall woman with short hair and an attentive gaze. DeMarco introduced himself and showed his badge. "I've been expecting you," Layla said, inviting him in. Sooner or later, the police were bound to arrive. They walked into the spacious living room, decorated in an austere, minimalist style. Layla offered the detective a cold drink. It was a hot day, but DeMarco politely declined. "Are you in charge of my brother's missing persons case?" Layla asked when they were seated. "Yes," DeMarco nodded. "And I need your help. Are you close to your brother?" "Very," she answered. "We grew up together, supported each other after our parents died. Malik is all I have left." "What can you tell me about his relationship with Tamara?" Layla's face changed instantly, becoming hard and tense. "That woman is a con artist. I knew it from the beginning, but Malik was blinded. She bewitched him, made him lose his head." "Why do you think that?" "My brother is a rational, cautious man. He built a business from scratch, always weighing every decision carefully. And suddenly, after 3 months of dating some hostess, he marries her. That doesn't sound like him at all." "Maybe he really fell in love?" DeMarco suggested. "Of course she knew how to play it." Layla grinned bitterly. "But I saw the way she looked at his credit cards, his house, his car. She didn't want Malik, she wanted his money." "Do you have any concrete evidence?" "I hired a private investigator," Layla admitted. "As soon as I realized where this was going, and you know what he found out? Tamara wasn't this woman's real name. In Atlanta, she was known as Nisha. And she had a similar scheme there, an affair with a rich man who went bankrupt shortly after they broke up." DeMarco pulled out a notepad. "Do you have a contact for this detective? I'd like to talk to him." Layla nodded and handed him a business card. "One more thing," she added. "A week before the wedding, Malik changed his will. Now most of his estate would go to Tamara in the event of his death. Before, everything was supposed to go to me and the charity he supported." "Are you sure about that?" "Absolutely. Our family lawyer informed me, even though he shouldn't have. He was worried about Malik, too." DeMarco asked a few more questions about Malik's daily routine, his habits, and possible places he could hide if he decided to disappear voluntarily. Layla was certain that her brother would never leave his business or cause her such pain with a deliberate disappearance. "I'm afraid this woman has done something terrible to him," Layla uttered before the detective left. "Please find my brother." On the drive back to the station, DeMarco reflected on the conflicting testimony Tamara portrayed as a loving, concerned wife, but her account contained inconsistencies. Layla was convinced of her sister-in-law's self-serving motives, but may have been biased by jealousy or resentment over the change of will. At the station, the detective was waiting for a response from Atlanta opening the email. He whistled. The information completely confirmed Layla's words. The woman who introduced herself as Tamara was indeed known in Atlanta as Nisha. There she worked at an upscale club where she met successful real estate developer Ray Tucker. After a year of their relationship, Tucker found his accounts emptied and his business on the verge of bankruptcy. Nisha had disappeared the day before the scandal broke. Tucker hadn't pressed formal charges, but in private conversations he'd named her as the culprit for his downfall. But that wasn't all. Before Atlanta, the trail led to Houston, where the same woman used the name Zara and was connected to an oil tycoon who had lost a significant portion of his fortune after their breakup. DeMarco leaned back in his chair, pondering the information he'd received. The picture was not a pretty one. Tamara, or whatever her real name was, seemed to be a professional hunter of rich men. But what happened to Malik? If she planned to rip him off, why get rid of him so quickly, just 3 days after the wedding? The next morning, DeMarco called Tamara back to the station. The day was just as sunny as the previous one, but the detective barely noticed the weather, fully immersed in the investigation. Tamara seemed more tense than yesterday, as if something had changed. "I have a few questions for you," the detective began as soon as they were seated. "Do the names Nisha and Zara look familiar to you?" Tamara flinched, but quickly pulled herself together. "I don't know what you mean," she said, but her eyes showed concern. "I think you do. We know about your adventures in Atlanta and Houston, about Ray Tucker and the other men whose fortunes disappeared after meeting you." Tamara pressed her lips together. "It's all slander. Layla turned you against me. She's always hated me, jealous of my happiness with Malik." "This isn't about Layla," DeMarco shook his head. "We have documentary evidence, photographs, witness statements. You changed names and cities, but the pattern was always the same." Tamara stood up abruptly. "I don't have to listen to this. If you haven't found my husband, I'm leaving. And by the way, you're supposed to be looking for Malik, not digging into my past." "Sit down," DeMarco said calmly but firmly. "We're looking for your husband, but your past may be the key to his disappearance. What happened to Malik? Did he find out about your previous scams?" "That's ridiculous," Tamara snorted, but sat back down. "I love Malik. Yes, I've had a complicated past. Yes, I've changed names when you're trying to start your life over. Sometimes you have to do that. But I would never hurt my husband." "Where were you the night he disappeared?" "I told you, at home, waiting for him. The neighbors can confirm I didn't go out. You can check the security cameras." DeMarco nodded. "We will. Now tell me about the will." "Malik changed it before the wedding, making you the main heiress." Tamara turned visibly pale. "Yeah, I didn't know about it. Malik never discussed financial matters with me." "It is strange that a wife does not know about such important decisions of her husband," said DeMarco, "especially when millions of dollars are involved." "Are you accusing me of something?" Tamara was indignant. "If so, then speak up." "Not yet," the detective replied. "But your story is looking more and more suspicious by the hour. We will continue the investigation, and if it turns out that you are involved in the disappearance of Malik—" "I want a lawyer," Tamara cut him off abruptly. "I won't answer any more of your questions without legal representation." "That's your right," DeMarco agreed. "But remember, the longer Malik remains missing, the worse it is for everyone who might be involved in his disappearance." After Tamara left, DeMarco delved into Malik's financial records, which had been obtained through the warrant. Suddenly, a strange transaction caught his attention. A large cash withdrawal the day before his disappearance. $50,000 had been withdrawn from Malik's main account. It could have been business-related, but it looked suspicious. The detective checked the bank's cameras. The footage clearly showed Malik withdrawing the money on his own. No signs of coercion or stress. He looked calm, even focused, as if he was executing part of a well-thought-out plan. Another unusual fact came to light when checking Malik's vehicle. His luxury SUV remained in the garage, but the Columbus airport had a rental car registered in Malik's name the day he disappeared. A simple mid-range sedan, not what the comfort-loving businessman usually chose. DeMarco requested surveillance footage from the airport and surrounding roads. A few hours later, the results were on his desk. One of the tapes, taken at a gas station 50 miles out of town, clearly showed Malik filling up a rental car. The timestamp showed 9 p.m., 12 hours after the alleged disappearance. DeMarco leaned back in his chair, mulling over the new information. Malik had not been kidnapped. He had disappeared of his own free will, having planned carefully in advance. But why? What made the successful businessman drop everything and run away 3 days after his wedding? The detective decided to have another talk with Tyrone, Malik's best friend and business partner. Perhaps he knew more than he had told the first conversation. That evening, DeMarco was already sitting in the luxurious office of the chain's main restaurant, now run by Tyrone in the owner's absence. Outside the window, the setting sun shone brightly, reflecting in the glass facades of the neighboring buildings. "Malik's alive," the detective began without preamble. We found camera footage that confirmed he left the city voluntarily. The question is why? Tyrone, a tall man with an athletic build, squirmed in his chair. I don't know what you mean. You're his best friend. If anyone knew about his plans, it was you. Tyrone sighed heavily, staring out the window at the golden light of the setting sun. Malik never wanted to marry Tamara, he finally said. It was part of the plan. What plan? He found out who she was before he even proposed. Layla's private investigator was his idea. He wanted to know who he was dealing with. And after finding out about her past, he married her anyway? DeMarco wondered. He wanted to teach her a lesson, show her what it was like to be deceived. Malik never forgot a grudge. Tyrone shook his head. I told him it was crazy, but he wouldn't listen. What happened next? The plan was to marry her, and then disappear. Make her think she was about to gain access to his fortune as a widow, then come back and reveal the truth. To publicly humiliate her as she had humiliated other men. But to do that, he would have to fake his own death, DeMarco remarked. Mere disappearance does not entitle her to an inheritance. Exactly. The next part of the plan would be to discover evidence pointing to his demise, but without a body. Enough to start the process of declaring him dead, but not enough for an immediate inheritance. He wanted her to suffer in obscurity. Sounds complicated and risky. The detective shook his head. Malik always liked drama, Tyrone shrugged. And he also wanted to buy time. For what? To transfer assets. Most of his money had long since been moved offshore. What he left Tamara in his will was only a small part of his fortune. It's like a decoy. DeMarco thought about it. The story sounded plausible, but something in Tyrone's demeanor was unsettling. He spoke confidently, but avoided a direct look. Do you know where Malik is now? No, Tyrone answered too quickly. He didn't say where he was going, for my own safety. And it doesn't bother you that your best friend has disappeared, making everyone worry, that the police are wasting resources looking for him? Malik has always done things his own way, Tyrone said. He'll contact me when he sees fit. DeMarco asked questions for a while longer, but didn't get any significant new information. As he left the restaurant, he was sure Tyrone was hiding something. Back at the station, the detective studied the traffic cam footage of Malik's alleged route. The trail cut off at a motel in a small town 200 miles outside of Columbus. DeMarco requested information on the motel's guests. Malik didn't register under his own name, but the description of one of the guests matched his appearance. After searching the database for the name listed on the registration, Andre Foster, DeMarco discovered that the man did exist and was Tyrone's cousin. Another confirmation of his friend's involvement in Malik's disappearance. DeMarco decided to check Tyrone's phone records for the last few days. Requesting the appropriate warrant, he quickly obtained a printout of the calls. Among them was a number registered to Andre Foster. The last conversation had taken place this morning and had lasted almost half an hour. Having gathered all the evidence, the detective was confident he had found the trail of the missing businessman. Malik hadn't been kidnapped or murdered. He was in hiding, keeping in touch with Tyrone. And the detective had a suspicion that there was much more to this story than just a desire to teach the con artist wife a lesson. DeMarco decided to check Malik's financial records again, this time more thoroughly. The oddities in the records he'd discovered pointed to possible problems in the business. What if the disappearance was not only related to Tamara, but also to some financial shenanigans? Tuesday morning greeted Detective DeMarco with a glowing sun and new questions in the case of Malik's disappearance. Yesterday's findings, surveillance footage confirming that the missing husband was alive after the alleged disappearance and a strange transaction before he went missing, forced a different angle on the case. DeMarco decided to look deeper into Malik's financial situation. On the desk in front of him lay a folder of documents from the bank. Account statements, loan information, a copy of the amended will. The detective scrutinized each sheet, making notes in his notebook. The amended will confirmed what Layla had said. Until 2 weeks ago, Malik's main heirs had been his sister and a charity for disadvantaged children. Now, 70% of the entire estate was to go to Tamara, 20% to Layla, and only 10% to the foundation. DeMarco put the will aside and took up the bank statements. The picture that emerged surprised him. Despite appearances of prosperity, Malik was not doing as well as he thought. Over the past year, large sums had been debited from his accounts, almost $2 million in total. The money had gone in installments to the accounts of various companies with vague names that sounded like investment projects. The detective made a request to look into these companies and soon received a response. Most of them turned out to be shell companies, registered in the Cayman Islands and other offshore zones. The trail of money cut off as soon as it left American banks. DeMarco rubbed the bridge of his nose. If Malik's business was going under, that could explain his disappearance. Perhaps he was simply fleeing debt or trouble with the law. But how did Tamara fit into that picture? Was she an accomplice, or just a convenient distraction? A phone call interrupted the detective's musings. DeMarco speaking. "Detective, it's Ellis from Finance. We ran a background check on Malik's restaurants. They're down 40% over the last year. He also has a $1 million loan with First National Bank, 3 months past due." "Thanks, Ellis. Send me the full report." DeMarco hung up the phone and thought for a moment. Malik's financial situation was much worse than originally thought. That could have been a motive for the disappearance. But the question remained, did he act alone, or did he have accomplices? The detective decided to meet with Tyrone, Malik's business partner. As his closest business associate, he had to know about the financial difficulties. The main restaurant of the chain Caribbean Pearl was located in the center of Columbus, a stylish 2-story building with panoramic windows and a bright sign. Despite the early hour, the institution was already filled with visitors. The aroma of spices and reggae sounds created the atmosphere of a tropical resort. DeMarco introduced himself to the maitre d' and asked to see Tyrone. A few minutes later, he was ushered into an office on the second floor. Tyrone appeared to be a tall man with an impeccable haircut and an expensive suit. His easy smile and confident movements made him look like a man used to impressing. "What can I do for you, detective?" he asked, pointing DeMarco to a chair by his desk. "I'm investigating Malik's disappearance," DeMarco replied, pulling out a notebook. "As his close friend and business partner, surely you can shed some light on some of the issues." Tyrone nodded, but his eyes grew wary. "Of course, I'm willing to help. We're all worried about Malik." "How long have you two known each other?" "Almost 15 years. We met in culinary school. We both dreamed of starting our own businesses. Malik was more talented. I was better at finance and organization. Together we built this business." "And how have things been going lately?" Tyrone tensed slightly, but quickly regained his composure. "Like everyone in the restaurant business, ups and downs. The last year was difficult, but we managed. And the $1 million loan at First National, 3 months overdue, also part of these ups and downs?" DeMarco asked directly. Tyrone grimaced. "I see you are well informed. Yes, we've had financial difficulties. The pandemic, rising food prices, competition, all of it took its toll on business. But Malik always found a way out. Like moving money offshore." There was silence in the office. Tyrone looked at the detective with an evaluating gaze, as if deciding how much he knew and how best to react. "I don't know what you mean," he said at last. "In the last year, about $2 million have gone offshore from Malik's accounts. You, as the CFO of the company, should have known about that." Tyrone stood up and walked to the window, looking outside. Malik made some bad investments, tried to diversify the business. Not all of them had been successful. And these failed investments had nothing to do with his disappearance? "Look, detective," Tyrone turned to DeMarco. "Malik is my friend. If he was in trouble, he would have come to me. I don't know why he's missing, but I'm sure it has nothing to do with business." DeMarco made some notes in his notebook. "And what can you tell me about his marriage to Tamara?" "It was unexpected," Tyrone answered cautiously. Malik had always been careful about relationships, and here he was having an impetuous affair, proposing 3 months later. It wasn't like him. "Did you try to talk him out of it?" "I'm his friend, not his babysitter. If he was happy, I was happy for him." Even knowing Tamara was a notorious con artist who changed names and cities, leaving behind ruined men? Tyrone froze, then slowly walked back to the table and sat down. "I didn't know about it," he said quietly. "Malik never said." Strange, considering you're best friends, DeMarco remarked. Malik's sister knew. She even hired a private investigator to look into Tamara's past. Tyrone lowered his eyes. Layla and I aren't on the best of terms. She never approved of our friendship with Malik, thought I was a bad influence on him. No wonder she didn't share her suspicions with me. DeMarco decided to change tactics. Let's get back to business. Who else besides you and Malik had access to the company's finances? Only our chief accountant, Ray Thompson. But he's been with us for 8 years. Totally reliable. I'll need to talk to him. Now tell me, has Malik had any strange contacts lately? New acquaintances? Unusual meetings? Tyrone thought for a moment. About 2 months ago, some man came to see him. They locked themselves in the study for almost an hour. When the stranger left, Malik looked worried. I asked him who it was, but he dismissed it, said he was just a supplier. Can you describe this man? Tall, well-dressed. He had a commanding demeanor. I don't remember much else. I saw a glimpse of him. DeMarco closed his notebook and stood up. If you remember anything else, or if Malik contacts you, let me know immediately. As he left the restaurant, the detective was sure Tyrone hadn't told the whole truth. He answered some questions too smoothly and others too unconvincingly. Definitely the business partner knew more than he was saying. DeMarco decided to make Tamara's background investigation the next point in his investigation. He already knew about her scams in Atlanta and Houston, but he felt that was just the tip of the iceberg. Back at the station, the detective sent inquiries to police departments in several major cities where Tamara may have operated under different names. Then he called a private investigator hired by Layla and made an appointment. Toward evening, DeMarco's phone rang. It was Tamara. "Detective, I need your help." Her voice sounded agitated. "I tried to access Malik's accounts to pay for the restaurant's operating expenses, but the bank turned me down. They say they need official confirmation that he's missing. Mrs. Tamara, you can't access your husband's accounts without a power of attorney or a court order declaring him missing, and that would take at least a year. But what about the business? Someone has to manage the finances until Malik is found." "As far as I know, Tyrone has all the authority he needs to run the business," DeMarco said. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I don't trust Tyrone," Tamara said finally. "He's always been biased against me. I'm afraid he might take advantage of the situation and embezzle Malik's money." "Do you have any reason to suspect that?" "Just a woman's intuition," Tamara answered evasively. "And also, I found some strange documents in Malik's office. It looks like some kind of receipts or promissory notes. Tyrone's name and large sums of money appear on them." "Can you show me those documents?" "Sure, I'll be home all evening." Hanging up the phone, DeMarco thought for a moment. Tamara was clearly trying to gain control of her husband's finances and at the same time smear Tyrone in the eyes of the police. But why? Perhaps she was truly unaware of the reality of Malik's business and was hoping for a large inheritance that didn't actually exist. The detective decided to follow up on one more lead before visiting Tamara. He went to the First National Bank where Malik had taken out a loan. The corporate account manager turned out to be talkative. "Malik has been one of our valued customers for many years," he said. "But in the last year, his financial situation had deteriorated. We met his needs and restructured the loan, but payments were still late." "And who was the guarantor of the loan?" "Malik himself and his partner, Tyrone. They both guaranteed it with their personal assets." "So if the business goes under, they both lose everything." "That's exactly right. It's standard practice for business loans of this size." This information put DeMarco in a new light. Tyrone was bound to Malik not only by friendship and business partnership, but also by financial obligations. If the business collapsed, both of them would suffer. That evening, the detective arrived at Malik's house, where Tamara now lived. The luxurious mansion on the outskirts of the city looked immaculate. Manicured garden, expensive cars in the driveway, all the signs of prosperity. Looking at this house, no one would have thought that its owner was on the verge of bankruptcy. Tamara met the detective in the living room. She was dressed in an elegant dress, her hair gathered in a neat bundle. Nothing in her appearance betrayed excitement or anxiety. "Thank you for coming, detective," she said, pointing to a chair. "Would you like some tea or coffee?" "No, thanks. You were talking about some documents?" Tamara nodded and pulled a folder out of her desk drawer. I found this yesterday when I was looking for our marriage license. Malik kept this folder in a hiding place behind the bookcase. DeMarco opened the folder. Inside were copies of promissory notes totaling $500,000. According to these documents, Tyrone had borrowed money from Malik over the past year. The last note was dated the week before he disappeared. Did you know about these loans? No, Tamara shook her head. Malik had never said that he lent Tyrone money. On the contrary, he always spoke of him as a reliable partner. DeMarco scrutinized the documents. They looked authentic, but something about the situation made him uneasy. May I take these papers for inspection? Of course, Tamara agreed easily. I want you to find the truth. If Tyrone is involved in Malik's disappearance, there's no evidence yet that anyone is involved in your husband's disappearance. DeMarco interrupted her. Don't jump to conclusions. Tamara lowered her eyes. You're right, detective. I'm just so worried. Every day without news is torture. DeMarco gathered up his papers and headed for the exit. At the door, he turned around. One more question. Have you ever heard of a company called Blue Lagoon Investments? Tamara froze for a moment, but quickly regained her composure. No, never. Why? Just following up on some leads. Thanks for your help. Getting into the car, DeMarco was almost certain Tamara had lied. Blue Lagoon Investments was one of the offshore companies where Malik's money was going, and judging by Tamara's fleeting reaction, she knew more about that company than she was letting on. The next morning, DeMarco received the results of the forensic analysis of the promissory notes. Tyrone's signature had been forged qualitatively, but it was still a forgery. Someone was trying to make him look like Malik's debtor, creating a motive for a possible crime. A new twist in the case came closer to noon, when the station received a call from a fisherman who had found the car in Lake Buckeye, 20 miles out of town. A police boat with divers was immediately dispatched to the scene. DeMarco arrived at the lake when the rescuers were already pulling the car out of the water. It was a black Mercedes, exactly like Malik's. The license plates confirmed that it was indeed his car. Divers examined the interior and the surrounding area, but no body was found. They found Malik's wallet with documents and credit cards in the car, as well as his smartphone with a dead battery. It looks like the car was thoroughly cleaned before it was flooded, said a forensic scientist examining the Mercedes. No prints other than Malik's own, and no signs of struggle or blood. How long was the car in the water? DeMarco asked. Judging by the condition, no more than 3 or 4 days, roughly matches the time of disappearance. The detective walked around the car, scrutinizing every detail. Something about the picture didn't add up. If Malik had really escaped, why leave the car in the lake with his personal belongings? And if he had been kidnapped or killed, why was there no sign of a struggle? A small crowd of gawkers had already gathered on the lake shore. Among them, DeMarco noticed a familiar figure. Tyrone stood a little apart from the others, watching the scene with an impenetrable expression. How did he know about the discovery of the car so quickly? DeMarco headed toward him. An interesting coincidence, Mr. Tyrone. How did you end up here? I fish this lake a lot, he answered calmly. I heard sirens and went over to see what was happening. Is that Malik's car? Yes, the detective nodded, watching his companion's reaction carefully. His personal belongings are inside, but there's no body. Tyrone remained unperturbed, but DeMarco noticed his hands trembling slightly. That's good news, right? It means he might be alive. Or someone wants us to think so, DeMarco remarked. By the way, did you know that the signature on those promissory notes Tamara found was forged? Tyrone raised his eyebrows in surprise. What receipts? According to those documents, you owed Malik $500,000. But the forensic examination showed that your signature was forged. That's absurd, Tyrone was indignant. I never took money from Malik. On the contrary, it was he who… Tyrone paused as if he had said too much. He what? DeMarco nudged him. Nothing. It's just that these accusations are ridiculous. Someone is obviously trying to set me up. And do you have any idea who? Tyrone glanced at the Mercedes that was being loaded onto the tow truck. I think it's obvious, he said quietly. Tamara's afraid I might interfere with her plans. She wants to control Malik's business, to get access to his accounts. But I can't do that without me. I have power of attorney to run the business when Malik isn't around. Do you think she had something to do with his disappearance? Tyrone glanced around as if checking to see if anyone was eavesdropping on their conversation. I don't know. But consider this. She shows up in Malik's life, quickly marries him, and 3 days later he disappears. Now she's trying to get control of his money and make me look bad in your eyes. Isn't that suspicious? DeMarco didn't answer. He looked out at the lake where the divers were continuing their search. The sun reflected in the water, creating a bright glare. The picture seemed almost idyllic, if it weren't for the grim context of what was happening. Malik's car had been found, but he himself remained missing. Tyrone blamed Tamara. Tamara suspected Tyrone. Both seemed to be hiding something, and somewhere in the middle of this web of lies and innuendo lurked the truth about the missing businessman's fate. The sun had not yet risen when Detective DeMarco arrived at the police station. The events of the previous day, the discovery of Malik's car in the lake, Tyrone's strange behavior, and Tamara's attempts to gain access to her husband's accounts kept him on his toes. He felt he was missing something important, some detail that would tie everything together. Turning on his computer, DeMarco began reviewing all the case files he had collected. Financial documents, expert reports, witness statements. All these fragments should have added up to the big picture, but so far it was not happening. The detective's gaze stopped on a folder with data about Tamara's past. He was rereading the report of the private investigator hired by Layla when one line caught his eye. Subject previously resided in Miami, Florida, where she used the name Lauren Davis. Worked at the Blue Wave nightclub owned by Tyrone White. DeMarco straightened in his chair. Tyrone White? The same Tyrone, Malik's partner? He quickly flipped through the report further, but found no further mention of Tyrone. Coincidence? Or a deliberately hidden connection? The detective dialed the number of the private investigator who had written the report. Despite the early hour, he answered almost immediately. "Minus Mr. Brooks, this is Detective DeMarco from the Columbus Police Department. I have a question about your investigation into Tamara." "Go ahead, Detective." "Your report mentions that she worked at a club owned by Tyrone White. Is that the same Tyrone who's now partnered with Malik?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Yeah, that's him. I've verified that information. Tyrone owned the Blue Wave from 2016 to 2018, then sold the club and moved to Columbus, where he became Malik's partner." "And Tamara worked for him?" "Yeah, for about 6 months. She left Miami around the same time Tyrone sold the club." "Why wasn't that information highlighted in the report? It's an important connection." Minus Miss Layla made it clear the purpose of the investigation was to learn about Tamara's past, especially her relationships with wealthy men. I pointed out the information about Tyrone, but didn't emphasize it because there was no romantic connection between them. At least not an obvious one. DeMarco thanked the detective and hung up. The picture was starting to become clearer. Tyrone and Tamara had known each other long before the latter had come into Malik's life. They had both kept that fact hidden. Perhaps their meeting in Columbus hadn't been a coincidence? What if they were acting in concert from the beginning? The detective sent a request to the Miami Police Department, seeking any information on Tyrone White and his Blue Wave Club. Then he called Layla. "Minus Ms. Layla, did you know Tyrone and Tamara knew each other before she showed up in Columbus?" "What? No, that's impossible. Tyrone owned the nightclub in Miami where Tamara worked. That information was in the report of the detective you hired." "Yeah, I didn't see it." Layla's voice shook. "My God, did they plan this whole thing? From the beginning?" "It's too early to draw conclusions," DeMarco replied. "But I need your help. Do you remember when exactly Tyrone became your brother's partner?" "About 5 years ago. Malik was expanding his business, opening a second restaurant. He needed a reliable partner with restaurant experience. They met at some food festival in New York. And Tyrone never mentioned his Miami background? He said he worked in the restaurant business in Florida, but no details. Malik trusted him." DeMarco made a few notes in his notebook. "One more question. Did your brother have death and disability insurance?" "Yes, a pretty big one. $3 million. He took it out when he started expanding the business. I was the beneficiary first, but I think he changed that after we got married." "Thank you for the information. Please stay in touch." Hanging up the phone, DeMarco thought for a moment. $3 million was a strong motive. If Tyrone and Tamara were acting in concert, They could have planned to get that money after Malik disappeared. But how to prove their connection? The answer came 2 hours later in the form of an email from Miami. It was accompanied by several surveillance photos from the Blue Wave Club. One of them showed Tyrone and Tamara, then Lauren, in unequivocal intimacy. They were kissing in the service corridor of the club. Even more interesting was the police report, also attached to the letter. In the year 2018, the Blue Wave Club was the subject of an insurance fraud investigation. Tyrone reported the theft of expensive equipment and received an insurance claim of $150,000, but later suspicions arose that the theft had been staged. The case was closed due to lack of evidence, but the suspicions remained. Now DeMarco had enough reason to have a serious talk with Tyrone. He called the restaurant and asked him to come to the station to testify. Tyrone agreed, but asked for a delay until the evening, citing an important meeting with suppliers. While waiting, DeMarco decided to follow up on another lead. He sent a request to the insurance company where Malik was insured and soon received confirmation of his suspicions. 2 weeks before his disappearance, Malik had indeed changed his beneficiary. Now, in the event of his death, Tamara, 60%, and Tyrone, 40%, were to receive the money. Tyrone arrived at the station at 6 in the evening. He looked tense, but tried to maintain a confident demeanor. "Detective, what can I do for you? Do you have any news about Malik?" "Have a seat, Mr. Tyrone." DeMarco pointed to a chair. "I have a few questions for you." He spread the photos from the Blue Wave Club on the table. "You knew Tamara before she came to Columbus. In fact, you had a close relationship with her. Why did you hide that fact?" Tyrone stared at the photos for a long time, then sighed. "I didn't want it to come out. It seemed wrong." "Wrong? It looks like conspiracy to commit fraud. You and Tamara knew each other. You brought her to Columbus, helped her get close to Malik, and then you both became beneficiaries of his insurance policy. And then shortly thereafter, he disappears. Quite a suspicious coincidence, don't you think?" Tyrone tapped his fingers nervously on the table. "It's not what it looks like." "Then explain how it really is." Tyrone took a deep breath, as if making an important decision. "All right, I'll tell the truth. Yes, Tamara and I knew each other in Miami. We had an affair. When I decided to move to Columbus, we broke up. It was a mutual decision. And then she miraculously shows up here and charms your partner. It was an accident. I saw her in town about a year ago. She said she was here to start a new life. We decided not to publicize our past acquaintance. It might raise questions." "And you didn't warn Malik that his new lover was your ex?" "I tried to, but he was so in love. By then, our business was already struggling. Malik was making risky investments, taking out loans. I was afraid that if I created tension between us, it would ruin the business for good." DeMarco tapped his pen on his notebook, watching Tyrone's reaction. "What about the insurance? Why did Malik make you a beneficiary along with your wife?" Tyrone looked away. It had been his idea. He'd said that in the event of his death, the business had to keep going, and that required money. $3 million was a lot of money, enough to start a new life. "What's your point, detective?" "That you and Tamara had motive to get rid of Malik, get the insurance, forget about the debt, and live happily ever after together." Tyrone jumped out of his chair. "That's absurd. I would never hurt Malik." "Sit down," DeMarco said calmly but firmly. "I have more questions." Tyrone reluctantly sat back down. "In 2018, your club in Miami was involved in an insurance fraud case. You faked a theft to get the insurance money. That's your MO, isn't it? And now you're using the same scheme but on a larger scale." Tyrone's gone pale. "That case was closed. There was no evidence. But the suspicions remained," DeMarco finished for him. "And now everything points to the fact that you and Tamara faked Malik's disappearance to get the insurance money. His car in the lake, his personal effects in place, a classic staging." Tyrone was silent for a few minutes, then gave up. "Okay, you're right. In part. We did plan to fake Malik's disappearance, but not to kill him, but to save the business." "Explain." "The business was on the verge of collapse. Malik owed large sums not only to banks, but also to private investors, some of whom had criminal connections. They threatened him, demanded his money back. We had a plan. Malik disappears, we get insurance, pay off the debts, and then he miraculously is somewhere with amnesia. And Malik agreed to this venture? Yeah, at first. We all planned it together. Me, Tamara, and Malik. She's really my ex, but their marriage wasn't a sham. They actually fell in love. But something went wrong? Tyrone nodded. At the last moment, Malik decided to act on his own. He withdrew the money from the account, all that was left, and disappeared. Without us. Apparently, he'd decided to start a new life on his own, leaving us to deal with the consequences. Why didn't you tell the police? What was I supposed to say? That we were planning insurance fraud? I was hoping Malik would come to his senses and come back, or at least contact me. DeMarco watched Tyrone carefully. The story sounded plausible, but something about it didn't add up. Do you have proof that Malik is alive and acting voluntarily? Only this. Tyrone pulled out his phone and showed a text message received 3 days after Malik's disappearance. I'm sorry, friend. I had to go off on my own. Too dangerous for you. Don't come looking for me. DeMarco made a copy of the message and sent it to the technicians for verification. That doesn't absolve you of responsibility for planning a fraud, the detective remarked. But if Malik is really alive and hiding voluntarily, it changes the nature of the investigation. At that moment, there was a knock at the office. A young officer entered. Detective, the results of the check on the number from which the message was sent. DeMarco took the sheet of paper held out to him. The number was registered to a prepaid card purchased in the small town of Radford, in a neighboring state. The location of the phone's last use was the same town 2 days ago. Looks like we have a lead. DeMarco turned to Tyrone. You stay here. I'm sending a patrol after Tamara. Both of you are under suspicion of attempted insurance fraud. Tyrone didn't resist as the officer took him to the holding cell. He looked almost relieved, as if the confession had lifted a heavy burden from him. Tamara was brought to the station an hour later. At first, she denied everything, but when DeMarco showed her proof of her connection to Tyrone and told her about his confession, she broke down. It was his idea, Tamara sobbed. Tyrone said it was the only way to save the business. Malik agreed, but then he just disappeared. Took the money and left us. Do you have any idea where he might have gone? He once mentioned a lake house in Radford, said he wanted to get away from all the hustle and bustle one day and live there in peace. We never took it seriously. DeMarco immediately organized an operation. Along with 2 officers, he left for Radford early the next morning. The town greeted them with peace and quiet. A typical American backwoods town with friendly residents and a measured life. The lake house Tamara had mentioned turned out to be a small log structure on the outskirts of town. DeMarco and the officers surrounded the house and prepared for a sting operation. Columbus PD! Malik, we know you're in there! Come out with your hands up! DeMarco yelled through a megaphone. At first, nothing happened. Then the door slowly opened, and Malik appeared on the threshold. He looked drained and tired, but definitely alive. I knew you'd find me sooner or later, he said, raising his hands. At the Radford station, DeMarco conducted a formal interrogation of Malik. The story he told was basically the same as Tyrone's version, but had important differences. Yes, we planned to fake my disappearance to get the insurance money, Malik admitted. The business was on the verge of collapse, and creditors were threatening us. But at the last moment I realized that Tyrone and Tamara were planning a double game. What do you mean? I overheard them talking. They were discussing how to get rid of me after the insurance claim. Tyrone was saying that a fishing accident would be ideal. I realized they were never going to let me come back. So, you decided to act on your own? Yeah. I withdrew the rest of the money and disappeared. I left my car at the lake as planned, but I drove off in a rental car myself. I knew they'd be looking for me, so I tried to leave no trace. Why didn't you go to the police? Malik lowered his head. I was afraid, and frankly I was ashamed. I'd gotten myself into debt, agreed to a fraud. I thought I could start a new life here, under a different name. DeMarco recorded statements and executed an arrest warrant for Tyrone and Tamara on charges of attempted fraud and preparing to commit murder. Malik was also arrested for participating in the preparation of insurance fraud and financial fraud. All 3 appeared in Columbus court the next day. Tyrone and Tamara denied the murder preparation charges, claiming their conversation was misinterpreted by Malik. but the evidence of their previous relationship and carefully planned fraud was irrefutable. The judge set high bail for all three. Layla, Malik's sister who had attended the hearing, looked at her brother with a mixture of relief and disappointment. He was alive, but his reputation and business had been ruined. As he left the courtroom, DeMarco pondered the strange irony of the case. Three people, bound by business and personal relationships, entangled in a web of lies and betrayal. Malik, trying to save his business, had agreed to a fraud. Tyrone and Tamara may have planned to get rid of him. In the end, all three lost everything: their freedom, their reputations, their businesses. But the truth had prevailed, and that was what mattered. DeMarco closed the case file and headed for his office, ready for new investigations and new mysteries.